The Sega Genesis was by far Sega's most successful home console in terms of hardware sales. Known as the Mega Drive in Japan, Europe, and Brazil, it was originally launched in 1988, a direct successor to Sega's Mark III, otherwise known as the Master System. Sporting a Motorola 68000 16-bit CPU very similar to the ones used in many arcade machines at the time, it was a big upgrade over the 8-bit machines of the era, and powerful enough to put it in good position to compete directly with NEC's PC Engine console, otherwise known elsewhere in the world as the TurboGrafx 16. The Sega Genesis would go on to get hundreds of great games during its run, and give Nintendo's 16-bit entry, the Super Nintendo, stiff competition in every region except Japan. There's a lot of ways you can experience the library of the Sega Genesis in 2018, including emulation, standalone retro consoles, and compilations released on newer consoles. Nothing beats owning the original hardware and software, however, and in this episode, I'm going to tell you the first 10 games you need to pick up as a brand new Sega Genesis owner. This isn't a top 10 best games video. Instead, I wanted to cover games that are fairly cheap, readily available, and excellent examples of the Sega Genesis experience. I hope you guys enjoy your first 10 games for the Sega Genesis. The first game you need to start your collection is one of the very best values of any single piece of software released during the life of the system. Simply titled Six Pack, and released in 1995 as both a hardware bundle and a standalone title, it's a compilation of some of the finest early release Genesis software on one cartridge. These games are tied into one front end, where you choose the game you want and off you go. You get the first Sonic game, the company mascot that helped launch the Genesis to stardom in 1991. Its gameplay can be enjoyed by everyone, and the graphics and sound both represent the system well. 1989's Super Hang-On shows up and represents the arcade version. Sporting a strong soundtrack and gameplay that can really challenge you, this is one of the better superscaler ports on the hardware. It isn't as fast or as smooth as the arcade on which it's based, but it's still a very solid racing game. Next up is Columns, Sega's jewel match puzzle game originally released in 1990. It's really easy to get into and play, and the Flash Columns mode can occupy you for hours. You get a great beat 'em up in the form of 1991's Streets of Rage. Great gameplay is reinforced by an awesome soundtrack and co-op multiplayer. This is the beginning of one of the finest beat 'em up franchises on the Genesis, and a must-play for any fan of the genre. You also get 1989's Golden Axe, another arcade port that does the hardware proud. Memorable music and a new stage and boss battle punctuate this classic hack-and-slash beat 'em up. Don't be fooled by its simple looks, as it still plays great today. The final game in the package is 1989's Revenge of Shinobi, a direct sequel to the original Shinobi arcade game. This side-scrolling action platformer has the bad guys from the first game returning, killing your mentor and kidnapping your girl. Driven by one of the best soundtracks of the 16-bit era, great graphics and responsive arcade-style gameplay, it's another great addition to the list, and a game that represents the hardware like a champ. All in all, the 6-pack here is a great starter package to what the Genesis offers. It's cheap too, often going between $10 and $30 depending on completeness and condition. If you happen to be in Europe, there's a series of releases there known as the Mega 6, which have similar bundles to this. My next recommendation is the mid-1990 release of ESWAT City Under Siege. This is based on the arcade game Cyber Police ESWAT, but has a number of design and gameplay differences that make it quite its own unique experience. You start out as a lowly police officer with a pea shooter trying to prove himself in Liberty City, and after a few stages of taking down the bad guys, you are ready to join the elite Enhanced Special Weapons and Tactics Group, also known as ESWAT. This run-and-gun platformer is another excellent showpiece for the Genesis. Despite being an early release, it has a very nice graphical presentation, including large boss battles, great stage verticality, and the color use is excellent across every stage in the game. Providing great atmosphere to these stages is the top-notch soundtrack, yet another early example of the incredible work Japanese teams did with the sound hardware in the Genesis. It sets the tone and feel of every stage, whether it's the brightly lit cityscape, an enemy stronghold, or even a dank and wet sewer. Every track exudes quality. The gameplay opens up with you just gunning down bad guys with your single-shot pistol and avoiding gunfire. That transitions in the third stage to you being fully armored in your mech suit, with multiple weapon options and the ability to take far more damage. With this upgrade comes a big step up in the enemies you face, as you will now have to face more firepower, enemies that fly, and even some enemies that have the firepower available to you. There's nothing here difficult to understand or get confused with. It's good old-fashioned arcade action and will challenge your skills and doesn't take up a lot of your time to play a game. Prices on eBay are incredibly reasonable, often no more than $20 complete, and much less in card-only form. It was released in every major region and should be an easy one to find. Despite the fact that the first in the series was in my earlier recommendation, you also need to pick up 1992's Streets of Rage 2. But why, you ask? Isn't the first one enough? It's a damn good game in its own right, to be sure, but Part 2 is an improvement in nearly every single way. The first thing you'll notice is the complete overhaul the visuals would receive. Characters and enemy sprites are now huge and loaded with new animations. Even the color has seen better usage, with everything appearing brighter and more detailed. With all this improvement in visuals, surely they sacrificed the epic soundtrack of the first game, right? Not at all. The famed composer Yuzo Koshiro returns to belt out another techno classic here. Just like the first game, every piece of music here is paired with a stage to create the perfect atmosphere and story. So great is it, you'll want to download this stuff to your phone so you can listen to it everywhere. Sega wasn't content with sitting on its ass with the gameplay either, and we'd see more moves, combos, and specials than the first game, and the great co-op gameplay would return so you can kick butt with a friend. It won't cost you an arm and a leg either, with complete games going around $30 and card-only games going half that. This is another example of the raw fun factor an arcade-style release can bring to the table, and even if your game time these days is limited, you won't have any trouble finding 15 or 20 minutes to devote to this unforgettable classic. When it comes to Genesis racing staples, you just have to get 1991's Road Rash. Set in California around illegal motorcycle racing, you'll need to literally fight your way through every race to place in the top 3 to qualify for the next run. Winning means you get money, which means you get faster bikes, progressing through longer races with even more obstacles in your way. Road Rash is a good-looking game for the Genesis, with copious amounts of background detail and lots of enemy riders filling the screen. It isn't the smoothest game around, but the gameplay is tailored to the experience perfectly, and it plays very well right out from the get-go. You'll see the difficulty ratchet up pretty quickly though, and you'll be fighting for both your life and a winning position in no time. Cops show up from time to time to make things worse, and before you know it, you are hooked on its brand of combat racing. Road Rash also has one of the most unique soundtracks you'll ever hear on the Genesis. It's as funky as anything you've ever heard from a video game console, but it has a way of entrancing you with its weird rhythms and tones. It adds so much to the experience and does as much to define the Road Rash experience as the graphics or gameplay. This is another one that will not set you back a ton. Complete games will often go around $20 or so, and lone carts will again go for much less. At those prices, this kind of gameplay can't be beat. Sega wasn't just concerned with porting its own games to the Genesis, and in late 1990, it would release Capcom's awesome arcade action game, Strider. This here, guys, would be one of the very first games on the Genesis to feature 8 megabits of memory, and boy did they put that memory to good use. The original arcade version had come just the year before, and the Genesis would get an outstanding version of it here. Characters remain large and well animated, and the background detail is solid with outstanding color. The music also does the arcade proud, mimicking the great emotional highs on every stage. The gameplay here is of the straightforward, kill the hell out of everything on the screen variety. Most of the challenge is centered around being in the right place at the right time, meaning that you'll need to play a few times to master everything. It's yet another arcade style game that defined the greatness of the Genesis during that time. These games were fast, colorful explosions of audio and video goodness that challenge the hell out of you. Expect a complete game to cost you around the $30 mark, and card-only prices around half that. Be wary of the Japanese releases of this game. There's a bug in the final stage that won't allow you to finish it without taking a death first. Mid-1993 would see the release of Shinobi III, yet another excellent addition to the Shinobi franchise. Despite the inclusion of Revenge of Shinobi in the 6-pack, you still need this one as early as possible in your collecting journey. Much like Streets of Rage 2, this would take the proven formula of the original game and add enough to elevate it to another level entirely. The graphics here are improved in a number of ways. You get more layers of parallax scrolling, better animations, and overall more varied and detailed stage design. Gameplay would see the biggest improvement here, however, with a fully expanded block mechanic that allows you to defend yourself at all times, not just while powered up. You get additional melee attacks as well, an all-new wall jump, and the great magic attacks make a return in an improved form. Despite Yuzo Koshiro not returning to do the music here, the soundtrack still kicks all sorts of ass, and provides each stage with a great audio experience to fight along with. You also get some added gameplay with various vehicle stages thrown into the mix, such as a horse and jet board. Revenge of Shinobi was a great experience on the Genesis, and Shinobi 3 complements it and improves upon in ways to make it very much worth its own place in your collection. Complete games are again around the $30 mark, and card-only games usually much less. You might not expect a sports game to make a list like this, but Evander Holyfield's Real Deal Boxing isn't your average sports title. Built upon a boxing engine that takes place from a side view perspective, this was hands down one of the very best boxing games released during that era. You have the ability to create a boxer from scratch, edit his physical features and stats, and start your hunt for the heavyweight gold. You'll need to fight your way through an assortment of contenders with various skills and abilities to finally get your shot at the big man himself, Evander Holyfield. Once you get the belt, you'll need to defend it until your boxer gets old and his skills begin to erode. Real Deal Boxing here is a great looking and sounding game, with large characters that have a decent amount of animation. There isn't much music to speak of during the actual game, but there is a fair amount of digitized speech, and the impact of the punches sound great with headphones. Gameplay is brilliant, and you'll need to find a sound strategy to succeed. Simply rushing in with power punches hoping for a quick KO will almost certainly result in you kissing the mat early on in every fight, especially against the more highly skilled opponents. It's the kind of game you can fire up for a quick match now and then and never get tired of it. There's a release called Greatest Heavyweights that you can interchange with this, that features licensed boxers of eras past. Both games play similar, and both are rarely more than a tenner complete. When looking for a cheap entry to start your shoot-'em-up collection on the Sega Genesis, you can do a lot worse than 1992's Biohazard Battle. Set on a world devastated by biological warfare, you will be battling all manner of creatures in your bid to take back the planet. The graphics in this one won't blow you away, but it does have some nice sprite work and effects throughout the experience. The soundtrack has a number of solid entries and fits the action well. The gameplay channels a little bit of the arcade classic R-Type, using both charged shots and satellites as the center of its power-up system. These are determined by colored spheres that give you genre staples such as powerful lasers, spread shots, and heat-seeking weapons. Slowdown does show up from time to time, but the game is otherwise extremely fast and provides a great overall challenge. You are given enough continues to beat the game after some decent practice, so this one shouldn't frustrate you too much. Unlike many of the other shoot-'em-ups on the Genesis, Biohazard Battle doesn't cost an arm and a leg. Complete games are usually around $30 or so, an absolute steal for a good shooter from the era. You also need 1993's Landstalker. Much like the shoot-'em-up genre, you'd think that finding a great RPG or adventure game on the Genesis would be next to impossible as a cheap first entry. Not at all, and this game here is a gem of an experience that can be scored very affordably. It's an isometric adventure game with heavy platforming gameplay and real-time combat. There's a load of RPG elements mixed in to make it not only a unique experience, but also one of the best games of its type. You are Nigel, a dedicated treasure hunter trying to make his way in the world, when you happen upon a chance at becoming rich, by finding the treasure of the King Knoll. Sporting great animation and a rich soundtrack, Landstalker here gives you a ton of areas to explore. You'll meet all kinds of characters along the way, and the story has a simple charm to it that is driven by excellent character design and their personalities. The gameplay does take some getting used to due to its viewpoint, and some of the platforming segments can be frustrating as hell, but the overall quality of this one can't be easily dismissed. It's done by the same team that did Dark Savior on the Sega Saturn, so you know right from jump it's going to be something worth looking at. Complete games will range in price all over the place, so be patient, go after the auctions, and for the love of God leave the buy it now option alone, unless it's a truly good deal. I'll wrap up our list of 10 with 1992's World of Illusion starring Mickey Mouse and Donald Duck. This is another internally developed Sega Disney property that just exudes quality. Following the classic Genesis Mickey adventure Castle of Illusion is no easy task, but this one lives up to its namesake and even brings a few new features to the table. The two-player co-op mode adds a ton of play value for this type of game, forcing each player to consider the other throughout the stage. As you might expect, the animation and visual presentation here is very impressive, keeping in tune with Sega's other work with Disney licenses. The gameplay is of course centered on heavy platforming elements, but is responsive and varied, and the aforementioned co-op can be played throughout the entire adventure. If you play alone, Mickey and Donald do have slight variations in the paths they take. The soundtrack is the weakest link in the chain here, sounding more like the Western release drivel we would get on the Genesis than the excellent Japanese design music you may be accustomed to. Even so, World of Illusion is a great entry into Sega's Disney stable, extremely playable, and a big improvement over the disaster that was Fantasia. The best part is that it's dirt cheap, with complete games going for rarely more than $20. I don't know how the hell games like this stay so cheap, while other games not nearly as good go for much more, but I won't argue with it. World of Illusion is a great game to start your Disney adventure on Sega's 16-bit powerhouse. Thanks for watching my episode on the first 10 games you need for the Sega Genesis. While the Genesis had a varied library of many good games, I feel its arcade roots were its main strength, and many of these games show that very well. There are many more fantastic games on the Genesis than what I've shown you here, but these will be a great starting point if you're new to owning and supporting the platform. You don't need to spend a fortune to start a great retro collection. I'm Sega Lord X. Thank you guys for watching, and I will catch you next time.